So how do you calculate margins in SaaS? This is actually quite difficult because usually what happens is some sort of version of the argument of, well, we have a lot of cost over here and we have a lot of revenue over here and we don't know how to connect the two. And it also becomes a question of whether to include what costs into that calculation. But we want to do from a commercial perspective an evaluation of whether a certain price and package to a given customer is going to be profitable or not, and to what extent. So let me showcase you how I would run something like this. So let's say that we have a SaaS product and we have, let's say, I don't know, 100 customers in that product, and let's say that we do, let's say, 10 million of ARR on those customers. So they're pretty large. The average account value is 100K. So that's great. And let's say that, so we'll do ARR up here, and then we'll do sort of accounts here. Let's say that it's an infrastructure heavy one. So they run, let's say, 1 billion API calls through our platform. And let's say that from the number of users, they have, I don't know, 1,000 users. What costs of our total cost balance should we include? And let's say that we have 10 million of ARR. And then we can go ask the CFO and say, well, how many expenses did we have all in? Let's just make it easy and say, well, we're going to have 5 million of costs left that we're going to consider like direct costs to serve. Now what you want to do is to say, okay, so the gross margin on this product is 50%, right? So we're making 100 million, we make 10 million, and then we have 5 million of direct cost to serve. So the cost of goods sold, the cost to serve is 5 million, and then we have a 50% gross margin. Great. Now, do we have a 50% gross margin on all the customers or just some? Because these customers are going to be different, right? So we're going to have, let's say, one customer that has, let's say, 500 million API calls and 300 users, right? And then maybe that customer is, let's say, 1 million of ARR, right? So they have 10% of the revenue, but they have 50% of the API calls, and then maybe they have 30% of the users. Okay, so we can sort of see that they have like a larger proportion of the costs here, but only sort of a smaller proportion of the revenue. And so these are the kinds of examples where at least the clients I work with, they tend to say, well, we're not sure that we're making money on this account. Like we're not sure that, this isn't, so if this is sort of half the cost, that we're not sure that we're actually spending like 2.5 million on this account and we're only making 1 million. So maybe we're like deep in the red on this one customer and we're actually making good money on all the rest. So, where do we sit on that? This is sort of the whole starting point for the discussion. Of all the things that you have going on, all the API calls, all the users, all the third-party licenses, all the whatever cloud costs that you have, you want to be able to essentially come to a few things that tends to drive costs, or at least correlate with costs. So, and this might be the reason for why we're picking users and why we're picking API calls, because there's going to be a lot of different other cost sources. You might say, well, we also have some storage and we also have some this, that, and the other thing. We actually don't want to necessarily measure the things that generate the costs. We just want to measure the things that actually proxy or correlate with the cost. So we actually don't want causation, we just want correlation here. We want to say, hey, the larger they are on whatever API calls, the more of everything else they also use. The more storage they use, the more of the third-party data they use, and so forth. So you might have let's say 100,000 fixed license on some third-party data. We want to find some key drivers that overall mimic or proxy the cost, identify those, and then just run some pretty simple math here. So usually it would be something like the following. We'll say, hey, we have some core infrastructure costs. Let's say for the 5 million, let's say we have maybe 1 million of what we just call overhead. And then let's say we have 3 million that we run on what we could just call infrastructure, or like IT operations or something like this. And then we have, let's say, 1 million where we say we're going to run this cost on, let's call that service. Okay, so if we have a scenario like this and say, okay, these are the structures, then we would say, well, The overhead, that's driven by the accounts. So we have to divide this by 100 accounts because we had 100 accounts here. The infrastructure, let's say that the proxy is the API call, so we divide that by 500 million here. And then the services, that's actually what we say, well, usually the more users they have, the more service they require, so we divide that by 1,000 users. Oh, we have to divide that by 1 billion API calls, right? And then we come to a price for each, right? So we say, well, 1 million overhead divided by 100 accounts, that's 10K per account. And then 3 million in infrastructure divided by 1 billion of API calls is 0.003, right? Yeah, which is actually sort of, API prices usually are a lot cheaper than this. So this is maybe 100 times more than an API call actually costs, but we don't care about that because we're not looking for causation, we're looking for correlation. So we say, well, the more API calls, the more of everything else, right? So we're just gonna say that we're gonna charge $0.003 per API call, just allocate that cost based on that volume. And then for the services, we're gonna say, well, that seems to be like 1K per user, right? So this is per account, this is per API, and this is per user. And then we get to calculate costs for this guy, right? So we're saying, well, we have 10K per account for this customer, right? And then we have 500 million API calls, so we're gonna say, so, oh, well, okay, it's actually half of this, so it's gonna be 1.5 million, right? Of costs here for API calls, and then we're gonna have 300 users times the 1K users, so that's gonna be, we're running out of space here, but 300K for the service cost for this account. So all in, it would be 10K plus 1.5 million plus 300K, so 1.8 million and 10K, right? So almost 2 million in cost. So 1,810,000. And since they're only paying us $1 million, then yes, we are actually losing money on this account. Is it precisely this much money? No, but is this likely to, let's say, have much bigger variance than what we just did? A little bit, but we're not going to be far off. So maybe in a scenario like this, we'll say, okay, so what about the smallest accounts? Maybe we have someone with only, let's say, a few thousand API calls and maybe a couple of users, and they will still pay us something like, let's say, 60K. So we will still have 10K of cost on an account like that because we have the overhead that we need to split on all the 100 accounts. But we wouldn't probably get more than 12, 15,000 worth of cost on a small account like that. And if we still charge them 50, 60K, the margins are actually quite good on these smaller accounts. And now we have some options of where we want to go with this. One option, of course, is to raise prices for these accounts and saying, hey, the costs are just way too big compared to the price you actually pay. So we still want to charge you $1 million license, but we also want you to pay something per API call and something for users or whatever it is, so that you participate in the cost and we get the account value on this to, let's say, something like 3 million in the least, which is actually a very viable strategy to raise prices on customers like this. But you need to run this, let's say, quick and dirty cost proxy evaluation first on your overall costs and then allocate them to the accounts. And notice that the total amount is, whenever you do like this exercise and run it for all the customers, whenever you then add up all the costs for the individual customers, you're going to get back to precisely 5 million. I hope this makes sense to you. It is fantastically useful in a lot of the projects that I run, so I hope it also will be for you. And yeah, good luck with it. Hey there, so I create these videos for free so that you can take your great SaaS product and turn it into a great SaaS business. So if you like the video and you got value from it, you should of course subscribe to the channel and also tell a friend. So write someone and say, hey, you're in SaaS, this guy talks about SaaS, maybe there's something in there for you. So that is the only way that this channel actually grows or these videos gets around. And this is sort of how I try to provide value to everyone. I have a network of clients that I have, and I get most of my business from referrals only. So the reason I make the videos and write the books and so forth is actually to just provide value to everyone else, because I can only be in one place at a time. So my hope with all these videos is just to do more good in the world. And if you tell a friend or you share, you can help me do that. So thank you.